My husband and I were just praying because we had never gone through this experience, and I really thought we were going to die.
And you could just see everybody's faces look scared, and then the stewardesses were amazing. They just came around to help everybody.
Just heard a really large bang as the right engine went.
Imagine that. Those are just some of the passengers from that United Airlines flight going from San Francisco to Honolulu. Some looking out the window, and this is what they saw and really felt, too. A piece of the cover had come off the plane's right engine. Those on board say they heard a loud bang, and then the plane began to shake. You can actually hear the rattling in this next video we're going to show you. It was taken by passenger Jeff Carter. Take a listen. All 363 passengers and 10 crew members did land safely in Hawaii. CNN aviation analyst, former inspector at the FAA, David Susi, joining us now on the story. You look at that, and it really does just leave you speechless for a moment. How dangerous was this situation, David?
Well, we're talking about this as though it's an engine cover, just what we refer to as the nacelle cover. But if you look at this more closely, it's more than that. It actually includes the intake itself, which is the anti-icing for that aircraft and for that engine. So this was much more dangerous than just a cover coming off, which does happen occasionally. But this is much more than that. It's structural. You can see the vibration of the aircraft, of the engine on the wing, which is designed to do. It's nothing really to fret about as far as the engine coming off. What I'm most concerned about is, since that damage goes into the front of the engine, what got into the engine, and could this have stopped the engine from turning at all?
Is this something that, in terms of a pre-flight checklist, is this something that is on it, checking these covers?
Absolutely, it is. Now, I looked at the flight path on Flight Radar 24, and the aircraft did successfully take off and go up to its altitude. It was only after it reached 36,000 feet that it started to descend and have troubles. So it's curious to me that it wasn't seen on the ground. If it was damaged there, it would have been. But I think it might be something that happened during takeoff or in the air after it was up in the air, too.
And does it have something to do with that altitude? You said it was after 35 or 36,000 feet. Is there something at that altitude that could have somehow impacted this situation?
Well, before that altitude, the engines are at a higher rotational speed, so they're putting out more thrust trying to climb. Once it stabilizes, once the aircraft is stabilized and trimmed and stabilized, then the pilots would notice or find something very peculiar at that time. They may not have even noticed that small pieces were coming off before that, but at that time they're stabilized and they know what's normal, and this certainly wasn't normal.
In theory, if something happens to one engine, how much time does a plane have with its other engine?
Well, that's a good question. We refer to as ETOPS, E-T-O-P-S, and that refers to how long the engine or the aircraft is approved to fly without an alternative airport as to where it can land. So this aircraft was approved for ETOPS. That acronym is something that we joke in the industry about calling engines turn or passengers swim, O-T-P-O-S. So it's a terrible joke, but the fact is that if that engine does stop, the aircraft can continue the flight to its designated alternate airport, but if it does go out in that phase of flight, is a very scary place for it to do it. So that what happens is the pilot reduce the altitude to 16,000 feet and also reduce the speed so that nothing else worse than what was happening would go on, to make sure that that engine did continue. But yes, the aircraft could have continued flying just on one engine and would have made its destination.
Would have made its destination. I mean, ultimately it was headed to Honolulu, but it also does take it. It makes you think about the fact that, you know, this plane was flying from fairly routine flight, but it does happen, the majority of it, over the Pacific Ocean. Not a lot of options at that point, except to continue on to Hawaii, which is your destination.
Yeah, I've taken that flight so many times. I used to work in Hawaii and come back when I was with the FAA back to California quite often. And it is an unnerving point in the flight when you're on your way and you have to decide if something goes wrong with that aircraft, do you turn around and go back, or do you continue the flight? So that is a very critical point at which you have to do a lot of math. That's why those future pilots that want to be pilots need to know math, because at that point you're trying to figure out exactly how far you can go on one engine and with the amount of fuel that you have and the carry and the load that you have on the aircraft.
Absolutely. David, appreciate your insight and your expertise here. And of course, we are all thankful that everyone landed safely.